This gentleman is interjected a few times already, is Mr. Bruce Friedrich. He's the co-founder and executive director of the Good Food Institute, an institute dedicated to finding alternatives to the various animal products we consume, especially in the food sector, which is quite a big one, as you likely know. He has been an advocate and great orator, in my opinion. I've heard him do several debates and give several presentations on the various projects at GFI and animal welfare initiatives generally. He tours the country. He goes to, mostly kind of like elite schools. His time is valuable.
Sorry, Harvard.
So, yeah, I mean a lot of like Yale, Princeton. I've had to travel. He was inducted to the Animal Rights Hall of Fame in 2004. So they never get one on. And yeah, so today he's here to talk about something that's like very relevant to many of you young faces in the audience, all of you young faces in the audience, which is how to go from like having an idea you're really passionate about, advocating for it, to actually like taking substantial action on it. And his talk is called, very helpfully, already up there for you, From Agitator to Innovator, a case study in EA career choice. So without further ado, let's please give a warm welcome to Bruce Friedrich.
Alright, that's not going to work. Hey everybody. Hello. How's it going? Excellent. Did anybody else get lost on the way over here? Alright, awesome. I have this tendency to I look at the map and I know where I'm going. And then I zone out and think about something else, and like 20 minutes later, I should have been there 5 minutes ago, so I get an extra 30 minutes of walking in that way. That's my exercise plan. Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you, Julia, and thank you to EA Harvard for organizing this event, and the Center for Effective Altruism for also sponsoring the event, and all of you for being here. There's really nothing, I don't think, that you could be asking yourselves that's more important than how can I personally do the most good in the world. So if you're at this conference, it is a very good bet that is something that you're thinking about, and I couldn't be more thrilled for you, because that's not something that I ever put in quite those terms when I was growing up until fairly recently. So I am delighted to have some context for some of the ways that I was trying to think, but not really with the framework. So I'm going today, probably for about 30 minutes, to tell you my story from agitator to innovator. And then if people have questions or comments or anything else, we can fill the remainder of our hour together with discussion. If not, we can get to the business school networking a little bit more quickly. So I'll start by saying I love meat. So I grew up in Oklahoma, and among my friends in Oklahoma, McDonald's Big Macs and Dairy Queen Blizzards were pretty much a religion. If the faith had a holy trinity, the Big Macs and the Blizzards would be joined by just about bacon anything. Then in 1987, I met this guy who blew my mind. He told me he didn't eat meat. Thought maybe he had a disease. The idea of not eating meat absolutely did not register. And quite honestly, it seemed more than a little freakish. Fast forward 30 years, and I'm standing up here, and I'm what probably everybody in this room would think of as a die-hard vegan. And not only a die-hard vegan, but I now run an organization that the EA watchdog organization, Animal Charity Evaluators, considers to be one of the 3 best philanthropic outlets for people who are concerned about animals. We focus on farm animals, as Matt mentioned. So I figured I would share my story today as a case study in trying to do the most good. I'll explain how I came to work on factory farming, some of the mistakes that I made along the way, and why I think that food technology is one of the most effective things that you can do if your goal is to make the world a better place. So I hope you'll find my case study useful, whether or not you choose to donate to this cause area, because I stumbled through the questions that a lot of effective altruists are grappling with. So for example, what is the best way to advocate for change? What is the best sort of change to advocate for? How can I personally do the most good? And who should I build coalitions with? How pure do people need to be in order for them to be somebody who can help you on the path to a better world? And the spoiler alert is not very pure. But let's start with how I decided to make it my mission to end factory farming. So the year is 1987, and I have nothing, before most of you were born, I'm realizing. I just suddenly feel really old. Anyway, the year is 1987, and I have nothing but time for the really big questions in life. And Socrates' adage, the unexamined life is not worth living, spoke to me. It's a powerful concept, right? Most of philosophy of the last 2,500 years has basically been a variation on that theme. What does it mean to lead an examined life? So I arrived on campus at Grinnell College in Iowa, and I joined an organization called Poverty Action Now. We organized campus-wide fasts to raise money for Oxfam International. We volunteered at a soup kitchen in the big city, well, Des Moines. And it was gratifying. I was starting to align my actions with my values, which felt very, very good. Then the organizer of the soup kitchen trips, he gives me a book called Diet for a Small Planet by Francis Moore Lepay. And the book clocks in at more than 500 pages, but here's the Cliff Notes version. Farm animals have to eat, and they're not particularly good at taking the food that we feed them and converting that food into meat. And this concept just makes intuitive sense. I weigh about 175 pounds. If I do nothing but lay in bed watching reruns of the Jerry Springer Show, I'm going to burn like 2,400 calories a day. Except when something awesome is happening on the screen, I'm Jerry. Then it ticks up a little bit when I'm excited. That same sort of relationship is true for farm animals. Not that they have the bad taste to watch the Jerry Springer Show, but that the vast majority of the calories that you feed to a chicken or a pig or a cow, the vast majority of the calories that you feed to a farm animal, the animal expends simply leading her or his life until they are slaughter weight. So Gandhi said probably 20 of the most powerful things that were ever said. One of the things Gandhi, I know he had sort of a lock on, he wrote all the time for people who know about Gandhi. It's a little bit like no, it's not like that, never mind. He did write a lot, so he had a lot more to sort of choose from, but he said he was sort of a profundity machine. And one of the things Gandhi said that had a very powerful impact on me, he said, think of the face of the poorest person you've ever seen and ask yourself if the action you contemplate will be of use to that person. Think of the face of the poorest person you've ever seen and ask yourself if the action you contemplate will be of use to that person. So for me, the wastefulness of growing massive amounts of crops and feeding them to animals, putting the vast majority of those resources into growing animals so that I could eat meat when there were plenty of other perfectly acceptable things for me to eat, that did not resonate. And I stopped eating meat immediately. After 4 years of volunteering in the homeless shelter in Des Moines, organizing fasts for Oxfam International, decided that the cause area I was most excited about was eliminating poverty. I actually went to Washington, D.C., and for 6 years I ran a homeless shelter for families, which also served as a sanctuary for people who were in the country illegally, and the largest soup kitchen in inner city Washington, D.C. And I didn't, so Jesus said, feed the hungry and house the homeless and clothe the naked. But I didn't just want to do what Jesus told me to do. I also wanted to look like Jesus. Handsome devil. When I was at the shelter, another member of the shelter community gave me another book called Christianity and the Rights of Animals, by an Anglican priest and professor of theology at Oxford University. And the book puts its arguments into a faith context, but it's really about what it means to live in the world, in our relationship with animals, with basic integrity. So you can sort of distill the factory farming portion of Christianity and the rights of animals down to a fairly simple equation. Every time we sit down to eat, we make a decision about who we are in the world. Do we want to be people who choose kindness, or people who choose cruelty? Do we want to be people who choose mercy or people who choose misery? And from a faith context or a context of just being a decent human being, it really does distill to that. Lindsay's argument is that we choose mercy, we choose compassion, and we stop eating animal products. So I wrestled with this and went and started talking. So I had been a vegan at this point for probably like 6 years for human rights reasons and environmental reasons. I wrestled with this concept, and I went to the people at the parish where I worshiped and told them that everything needed to be vegan because that's what Jesus wanted. I told all my friends and family that everything needed to be vegan because that's what Jesus wanted. And everybody else I could find, and of course everybody went vegan in response to my Yeah, not so much, right? But after a little while of sort of beating my head against that wall, and I didn't put it into this context, but I thought there are lots of people, like I have lots of friends who are running homeless shelters. There are lots of Catholics who care about global poverty. There aren't a lot of Catholics. There aren't a lot of people, relatively speaking. This is 1996, and I think it's still true. Considering the weight of the problem, the 9 billion animals on factory farms, the 9 billion animals slaughtered just in the United States every year in slaughterhouses, there aren't that many people. This cause area, there's a lot of suffering, it's big. There aren't a lot of people focused on it, it's neglected. And at that point I thought, all I need to do is tell enough people what's happening and everybody's going to go vegan. So I saw it as fantastically tractable. It's just an issue of educating people. So those of us in the effective altruism movement, we get a lot of flack for effectively putting philanthropy through this sort of cost-benefit analysis, right? And I think that's unfair, because I think a lot of people in EA, even though, and people just in the wider world, but certainly in EA, we follow paths that are fairly similar to mine, where there isn't really that much difference between following our heads and following our hearts. So I ended up at PETA, I thought, doing this sort of standard EA analysis. I was wrong on some points, but those were my reasons for moving into vegan advocacy. I found the arguments against factory farming extremely intellectually compelling. The caloric inefficiency, the threat to the climate, the sheer number of sentient beings being harmed. But I probably wouldn't have chosen that path if the arguments weren't just as compelling to me on an emotional level and on a spiritual level. So you could say in an EA context that I was maximizing the expected utility of my marginal efforts relative to the counterfactual. Or you could say I was honoring my duty as a Catholic to care for the least of these who Jesus talks about in Matthew 25. And either way, you would be right. After deciding what to work on, I had to figure out how to achieve the change that I wanted to see. So I started by appealing to people's moral values. I left the soup kitchen and the homeless shelter, and I joined People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, where I served as vice president for campaigns. I figured it should be easy to convince people because pretty much everybody agrees with the basic principles that support dietary change. So one of the things that I do, not really as a part of GFI, but just because I was doing it before and I enjoy it, is I go to college campuses and debate against the debate team, and the resolution is resolved: eating meat is unethical and unhealthy. And my debate partner is John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods. And we've done this at Stanford and Harvard and Yale and Emory so far. And one of the things that I do at the start of my presentation, which is mostly focused on ethics, so I walk out and I say, who here thinks that we should, as much as we possibly can, try to eliminate global poverty from the face of the planet? And I'll ask you to play along. Who thinks we should eliminate global poverty from the face of the planet? Who here thinks that where we have a choice between doing something that's good for the environment or bad for the environment, we should go with good for the environment? Who here thinks that if we can be nice to animals or mean to animals, we should be nice to animals? All right, so you guys use evidence to make your decisions. I'm not surprised that everybody in the room raised their hand to those three things. But there's very few people who are like, yes, I want to harm animals. Yes, bring on global ecocide. Right? Not that many people. Occasionally, like, you can see a lot of these debates online, and sometimes the debaters will have like seeded the room with a few people who like raise their hand to the bad side of all three, or don't raise their hand for those three questions. But for the most part, everybody in society wants to see the global poor fed. Everybody in society would like it if the environment weren't under such duress. Everybody wants to be kind to animals. So I assumed all I really had to do was say, look what's happening on factory farms, look what's happening in slaughterhouses, and of course everybody's going to align their actions with their values. Of course everybody's going to go vegan. But what I quickly figured out is that just isn't true. I want to share my 5 go-to facts during my time of, this is me at PETA. This is appealing to people's, I don't know, hearts or revulsion factor or something. That's my wife, Alka. We're outside a foie gras restaurant in Washington, D.C. So here are my 5 go-to facts to try to convince people that they should adopt a vegan diet. And the first fact is that meat is a huge contributor to climate change. So most people, when we think about climate change, we think, our number 1 contributor is probably driving or flying. And the best thing that we can do to decrease our support for climate change is to drive a hybrid, or drive less, or fly less, or all 3. But according to scientists from the United Nations, more climate change is caused by animal agriculture than by all of the planes and trains and trucks and cars combined. On a per calorie basis, according to an article in the journal Nature, chicken is the least climate change inducing animal. And on a per calorie basis, per protein calorie basis, chicken causes 40 times as much climate change when compared to legumes like peas and soy. Fact 2, the widespread use of antibiotics on modern industrial farms is leading to the development of antibiotic-resistant superbugs. According to a report from the UK government, these superbugs are going to cost the global economy more than $100 trillion by 2050. And the threat to the human race from superbugs is more certain, their words, than the threat from climate change. Fact 3, raising animals for food is a major cause of the world's most pressing environmental problems. According to a report from UN environmental scientists, raising animals for food is one of the top contributors to all of the world's most pressing environmental problems, whether you're talking about soil desertification, or climate change, water use and water pollution, or loss of species diversity. Fact 4, every single year, according to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, tens of millions of people get sick from eating contaminated meat just in the United States. Tens of thousands of people end up in the hospital, and more than 1,000 die. Fact 5, according to poultry researchers from the University of Arkansas, chickens today grow more than 6 times as quickly as they would naturally. If a human baby grew as quickly as a modern broiler chicken, by the time she was 2 months old, she would weigh more than 650 pounds. Imagine that, a human baby, 650 pounds at 2 months old. Every single moment of these animals' lives is categorized by unmitigated misery. All right, if you weren't vegan when you walked in here, is everybody going to walk out of here vegan? Boom! Of course not. Facts just don't get most people, unfortunately. As I mentioned, when I adopted a vegan diet in 1987, I really did just think all I had to do was just explain to people, I read a book and went vegan. All I need to do is, give them the Cliff Notes version, and of course, everybody's going to go vegan. That's the rational thing to do if you don't want to waste resources. Well, that didn't work. So then I went to work at PETA in 1996, and I thought, of course, I don't learn very fast. I thought, of course, all I need to do is show people what's happening in these farms, show people what's happening in these slaughterhouses. Everybody opposes cruelty. Obviously, everybody's going to go vegan. It didn't work that way. What I've come to understand is that people generally don't make their day-to-day life decisions on the basis of rationality or on the basis of ethics. I think that's probably especially true for food. There just seems to be something in human nature for a lot of people. I don't know if it's physiological or psychological or emotional, but people just really like to eat meat. And one of the things I've noticed is that people don't like it when I come along and tell them that they're unethical, immoral, a moral reprobate for their day-to-day life choices. Obvious, right? Well, it took me a long time to figure this out, but the central brainstorm of the Good Food Institute is based in this sort of realization, and we've moved from trying to guilt people to talking about what people should eat instead. So things like this, which is plant-based sausage from Tofurkey, this, which is plant-based chicken from Beyond Meat, this, which is a TGI Fridays Beyond Burger, also from Beyond Meat. Bill Gates wrote a blog about plant-based meat. He called it the future of food, because these new plant-based meat companies are getting better and better at replicating the taste, the texture, the entire experience of meat consumption, so that everybody who eats meat, they continue to make their dietary choices on the basis of the exact same factors that they always have. Tastes great, cultural, emotional, whatever your reasons, you continue to make your decisions on the basis of the exact same factors, except that what you're choosing becomes better. And that vision for the future is what turned me, a hardcore vegan activist, into somebody who runs a nonprofit organization that's focused on markets and culinary innovation. So basically the quest for a better burger. I'm convinced that the way we make meat is the solution to factory farming. But to be fair, I used to be convinced that fats were the solution to how we end factory farming. So what's the evidence that I have to back up that I'm finally onto something? There are at least 3 reasons that I think we can adduce for the idea that a market-based approach is the way to go. The first one is that it's been done before. So think about soy milk and almond milk. When I adopted a vegan diet 30 years ago, and even 15 years ago, soy milk and almond milk were at basically 0% of the milk market sector. You couldn't find them in grocery stores, you couldn't find them in coffee shops. You did track down a carton of soy milk in the sort of nether regions of your local health food store, covered in dust. Stuff tasted like liquid paste. It was not a good culinary experience. Flash forward just 15 years, and now soy milk and almond milk comprise more than 10% of the milk market sector, and they're right there alongside the cow's milk in your local grocery store. So taking plant-based meat to where plant-based milk is today, plant-based meat right now is 0.25% of the meat market. Who here has had a veggie burger or veggie nugget, some sort of plant-based meat in the last month or two? Yeah. Well, a statistician would tell you that actually that was a figment of your imagination. There's 0.25%. That's within the margin of error of not existing for this market sector. That goes over at places like Harvard and MIT a little bit better than it goes over in some other places. But going from 0.25% to 10%, that's 10% less climate change, 10% less of all of the harms of industrial animal farming, and it's more than 900 million, just in the United States, it's more than 900 million animals whose lives are categorized by unmitigated misery. It's more than 900 million animals who are suffering less. But I'm absolutely convinced we can do a lot better than 10%. Once we have a product that tastes the same or better, and it costs less, and when was the last time an innovation was like better on the basis of the factors that actually consumers cared about, and it didn't completely replace? We can do a lot better than 10%. The second reason, here's this is milk at 10%. This is plant-based meat at 0.25%. You go from that to that, it's a tremendous amount of good. We need another slide that shows it at 95%. The second reason I'm excited is all of the innovation and the fact that the innovation is fairly new. So at the same time that I was arguing for ethically inspired veganism, there was a small band of entrepreneurs that actually had their eyes on this prize. It just started in 2009. Up until 2009, pretty much all of the vegetarian meats were the waste product of the soy and wheat industries. And it was basically, so soy was making oil, and they had all this protein. What should we do with this protein? Let's, put it into a burger shape and sell it to vegetarians. They can't eat anything else anyway. And the same basic idea was true for wheat. They wanted the carbohydrates to make bread and pasta and that sort of thing, so they had all this waste protein, cram it together, call it seitan, and hope somebody eats it. In 2009, Ethan Brown comes along, and he's really interested in saving the environment. He's working in clean energy. And he reads the UN report that I was referencing earlier, and he thinks, meat is just made of lipids, amino acids, minerals, and water. We can do that with plants. There's everything in meat we can make with plants. And he forms Beyond Meat, and he sets his sights on creating products that will cost less and taste the same or better. We did it with soy milk. We're doing it now with radical intervention in plant-based meat. So we're only a few years into this. We've already seen incredible developments. So Beyond Meat is now in the meat case of a lot of grocery stores. Impossible Foods has identified the molecule responsible for the taste of blood and found a way to source it from plants. The company Just is making mayo from peas and scrambled eggs from mung beans. And they're scouring the plant kingdom for more underappreciated proteins. But for people who just absolutely have to eat meat, and I'm convinced there are a fair number of these people. I was actually, Marie took me on a tour. Marie, where are you? Marie took me on a tour of, Marie is a clean meat researcher at Harvard Medical School, and she took me on a tour yesterday, and we were talking with one of her coworkers, and he is emblematic, I think. And it was like, okay, so plant-based meat tastes exactly the same or better, and it's less expensive. And this dude, who, again, is he a postdoc at Harvard Medical School? He's like, I'm not going to eat that. It's like, it tastes the same or better. It costs less. Yeah, I'm not going to eat that. That's pretty much his argument, right? There wasn't much of an argument. It's just, I'm not going to eat that. And that's at Harvard Medical School. I mean, go to Wisconsin, go to Iowa, go to North Dakota. Oh my God, there's going to be some. I'm not going to eat that. For those people, we have clean meat. That is real meat. It's the exact same product, but it's made directly from cells. So right now, you grow massive amounts of crops, you feed those crops to animals. The animals spend most of that energy simply existing. Here, you create the feedstuffs, you feed the cells directly. You don't have the feathers and the scales and the skin, you don't have the bones, you don't have anything you don't want, and you don't have the animals leading their lives, you just grow the cells directly. Here's a clean meat meatball. It's called clean meat mostly as a nod to clean energy. Clean energy is energy that's better for the environment. Clean meat is meat that's better for the environment. Uses as much as 95% less, creates as much as 95% less climate change, 90% less water, 99% less land. And because it requires 99% less land, all of the land that's freed up can be repurposed to the creation of renewable energy. So you've got a product that actually allows for the creation of more energy than it requires to produce. And all of that energy is renewable. So that multiplies the positive climate impact. It's also clean meat just because it's cleaner. It doesn't have the same antibiotic residues because there are no live animals to be fed antibiotics. It doesn't have the same bacterial contamination, so the stuff I was talking about, food contamination and illnesses and hospitalizations and deaths. For the most part, that stuff goes away. Here's some clean meat duck. This is what clean meat will look like at scale. Basically your friendly neighborhood meat brewery. I will spare you any slides for comparison of industrial animal farms to slaughterhouses, but suffice it to say that the clean meat brewery is a lot more pleasant to look at. One of the things at the Good Food Institute that we've been particularly surprised by, so we just started working on the endeavor in October of 2015. We launched on February 1st of 2016. We hired our scientists in June of 2016. And when our scientists came on board, we really assumed that, so you've got clean meat and you've got plant-based meat. And our assumption was clean meat is sort of high-tech. And our expectation was that there were going to be a lot of things that we didn't know, that we were going to be constantly learning in the realm of clean meat. And that plant-based meat, we'd all been eating veggie burgers for a really long time, they probably have it all worked out. But what we discovered is that literally the opposite of that is true. So in 2.5 years of doing clean meat exploration, there hasn't been anything we didn't know. So we thought there were 4 critical technology elements. We thought the questions we need to answer is, how do you scale up the cells? How do you create immortalized cells? What do you feed to them, especially getting a xeno-free media? How do you grow them? What does the scaffolding process look like? And how do we scale up the bioreactors? Those are the 4 critical technology elements. Those were what we knew them to be then. Those are still what we know them to be now. So we've certainly learned a tremendous amount, but it's all 4 of the thing. Everything we've learned fits into those buckets pretty neatly. With plant-based meat, what we didn't realize at that point is what I said just a minute ago, that plant-based meat to now has been, let's take this waste product of another industry, cram it together, and feed it to vegetarians. And the vegetarian market is, can create multiple companies that are successful. So plant-based meat may be just 0.25%, but that's still like $570 million last year. You can have a bunch of successful companies at $570 million. But the path of exploration in plant-based meat is vast. So we don't yet know the vast majority of crops. What does it look like to optimize those crops for plant-based meat? So again, soy and wheat were basically an accident of protein excess in other industries. And so Ethan Brown comes around and selects peas because he read some research that was happening at the University of Missouri. But it could have been lentils, it could have been lupin, it could have been garbanzo beans, it could have been a wide variety of other pulse crops. Similarly, how do you create plant-based meat? Up until now, it's been extrusion. It's been extrusion literally for decades, just because they were using extruders for other things, and they thought, hey, maybe if we put this protein through an extruder, it won't suck as bad. And it worked out. It didn't suck as bad. But there is overwhelming opportunity in plant-based meat, and probably at least as much as in clean meat, because clean meat is just scale-up tissue engineering. So we put at least tens of billions of dollars into tissue engineering for therapeutics. All plant-based meat all clean meat is scale that up, get the price down, apply it to food. With plant-based meat, there's just literally no background research yet. And so we're building an industry essentially from scratch. All right, finally, the third reason that I'm excited about plant-based meat and clean meat, the third reason that I think this probably is the solution and how we end factory farming, is that big money agrees. So it probably won't surprise anybody in this room that Google co-founder Sergey Brin and Bill Gates and Richard Branson and Kleiner Perkins and DFJ and Grinnell Ventures, Silicon Valley is excited about solving the food problem, the factory farming problem, with food technology. And that's probably at least a little bit predictable. But more surprising to a lot of people is the degree to which we have very serious allies in the meat industry itself. So Tyson Foods is an investor. They launched their Tyson Ventures, their venture capital fund, about 2.5 years ago, and 2 of their first 3 investments, their first investment was Beyond Meat, and their third investment was Memphis Meats. And Tyson's CEO, Tom Hayes, he said, plant protein is going faster than animal protein. For us, we want to be where the consumer is. And at GFI, we have a really tight relationship with a whole bunch of different people at Tyson. We're holding a conference in September. Tyson is coming to our conference. We've been to their offices in both Bentonville, Arkansas, and Chicago, Illinois, to chat with them about plant-based meat and clean meat. So too Cargill, which is the 3rd largest meat producer in the United States, PHW Group, which is the largest poultry supplier in Germany. There's a meat company in Israel that is not only doing its own plant-based meat, but it's devoting 20% of the profits from its plant-based meat to an endeavor that's focused on growing clean meat. They're that invested. So pretty much all of the corporate executives we talk with, the government policymakers, the regulators, the foundations, the venture capitalists, they're all super excited about the fact that we are cracking the meat code. We're producing meat in a far more efficient way, whether it's plant-based meat or it's clean meat. And that means that there's going to be vast profitability there as well. But these folks are human beings, and they want to do good in the world as well. So they also are motivated, including at the meat companies, including at government foundations, including everywhere. People are also motivated by the amount of good this can do in the world. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt was speaking at the Milken Global Conference, and he was asked to talk about 6 technological innovations that he thought would improve life for humanity by a factor of at least 10-fold in the fairly near future. So, technological innovations, improve life for humanity, factor of at least tenfold, fairly near future. And he's the CEO of Google. He talks about mostly things you'd expect. He talks about 3D printers for infrastructure, talks about self-driving cars, talked about watches that know you're sick before you know you're sick, so you haven't yet had your heart attack and the ambulance pulls out in front. That strikes me as pretty cool. But the first thing that Schmidt talked about, the very first thing, was plant-based meat. Because he sees it as an answer to two of humanity's really big questions. First, how are we going to feed 9.7 billion people by 2050? And second, what are we going to do about climate change? And Schmidt pointed out a lot of the stuff that I've been saying over the last however long I've been talking, that it's so much more efficient, we can feed a lot more people, and it's so much more efficient, so many fewer stages of production, that will create a lot less climate change. Schmidt called it nerds over cattle. Which I like, nerds over cattle. At GFI, one of the things that we're focused on, we have 5 program areas. One of the program areas is policy, and our policy department is focused on 2 things. Thing one is looking at the US agricultural and other budgets where money could be devoted to plant-based meat and clean meat R&D. So going to the government and saying, you put $3 billion into ag research, some of that money should fund plant-based meat and clean meat R&D. Then the other half of it is clearing the regulatory pathway forward for clean meat once it's introduced. But our international department is really focused on making connections to governments and saying to governments, you care about food safety, you care about food security, other than the United States, you care about climate change. You want to keep antibiotics working. There are a lot of things that governments care about that plant-based meat and clean meat, they are the solution to those issues. So we're going to governments and we're saying, you need to be putting some of your R&D budget into plant-based meat and clean meat R&D. This should not be something just for Silicon Valley venture capitalists and the odd postdoc at Harvard Medical School or whoever else. I'm not calling you odd. So that's a big part of what we're doing, is attempting to apply some resources in order to free up literally billions of dollars for something that governments should be funding. And one of our talking points is, the people who know more about tech than anybody else in the world, Silicon Valley, they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into this. Shouldn't governments be putting even more, since it answers questions that you want answers to? But if you want to explore a career in plant-based meat or clean meat, there are a lot of straighter paths to that than getting 6 years of soup kitchen and homeless shelter experience. If you look at your program, you'll see that there are several sessions today that will bring you much more deeply into how you can get involved in this and get more career advice. But here's my basic advice. First, if you could go into science, if you've got your bachelor's in science, continue going into science. The most common talent constraint that we see at GFI is highly competent and mission-driven entrepreneurs who need more scientists that figure out the nuts and bolts. So tissue engineering, crop sciences, stem cell biology, biochemistry engineering, these are some of the big ones. But definitely read through the various documents that GFI has put out about these emerging technologies, and you'll see that there are a lot of ways, if you are a scientist, that you can apply yourself. And after you do that, GFI, one of the things that the ways that we believe we bring value into the world is if you want help figuring out what your career trajectory should be in plant-based meat and clean meat, it is not an inconvenience to us to have a conversation with you. It's our job to have a conversation with you. If we can, through a couple of conversations and sending you some stuff to read, influence how you spend your 80,000 vocational hours in a way that's going to help us with mission, there's probably no better way for us to spend however many hours we're spending with you. So at GFI, please don't hesitate. If you would like to have conversations about what you should do next, we are at your disposal. The second thing is, if you're going to go the business route, really think about the question of replaceability. So for people who haven't dived into the 80,000 hours website, if you have not yet figured out what your career trajectory is going to be, or if you're open to exploring something different from what you think it is, dive into the 80,000 Hours website, because there are some insights in that website and some insights in the way that EA thinks about vocation that I think are absolutely crucial. And probably, I make time for anybody who wants to talk with me about, just deeply honored. If anybody ever wants my thoughts on what they should do with their lives, so I just always make time. So I end up having a fair number of these conversations. And probably the insight that I bring to people that they hadn't thought of more than any other is the concept of replaceability. So most people are thinking, I'm going to go apply for a job that's doing a lot of good. So we think about how big is the cause area as one of the sort of key things that we're thinking about, and we think about tractability, and we think about other issues and sort of how we should be evaluating a charity that we're going to give to, but we think a lot less about the question of, if I didn't do this, what's the counterfactual? What would happen if I didn't do it? And I think that's something that we should be thinking more about, because there are a lot of people vying for the jobs at Memphis Meats and Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods and all of these companies, but something that very few people are doing is going and getting experience at Tyson Foods, or Kellogg, or Cargill, or any of the really big meat and other food companies, going and working in these companies for a couple of years, and then bringing that experience to the plant-based meat or the clean meat market sectors. And there are two, if you're a business person, two really good things that happen when you do that. Thing one is maybe you influence that company. Like if you end up on a serious executive career trajectory at Tyson Foods or Cargill or Kellogg or one of these companies, you can do a lot of good from within. But even if you don't, you go to one of these companies and you learn what food production actually looks like. A lot of the people who have started the plant-based meat and the clean meat companies, I mean, it's not like starting a tech company. You can literally start it, it's a little like starting a tech company, but there are aspects of it that are radically different. You know, you can start a tech company with a computer in your basement. If you need to actually move billions of pounds of food around in order to be successful at what it is that you're trying to do, some experience with companies that have spent decades moving billions of pounds of food around are going to be absolutely invaluable. And then three, GFI is starting a fellows program. This isn't what you should do with your 80,000 hours, but GFI is starting a fellows program. So we have a fellow at Stanford Business School, we have a fellow at the Wharton School, and we're looking for fellows on other campuses. I guess most of you are at Harvard. We will definitely be looking for fellows at Harvard. And we've got sort of three buckets of the fellows program. Bucket one is business schools, so top business schools. Bucket two, we've created a list of about a dozen schools that we think, on the basis of maybe 8 or 10 factors, are particularly primed for plant-based meat research, and then about a dozen that we think are particularly primed for clean meat research, and we'll be hiring fellows at all of those campuses. And if you decide to make the world a better place in some other way, I hope there are a few things that you can glean from my experience. So the first one is that you don't have to choose between your head and your heart. Diving deep into critical research is a part and parcel of profoundly caring about the world around you. So back to that Gandhi quote, think of the face of the poorest person you've ever seen and ask yourself if the action you contemplate will be of use to that person. Just challenge that to take that a step forward and think about the issue and all of the people suffering, and what do people who are suffering in those sorts of situations, how do they want you to make your life choices, probably for maximum impact. Accept that you might not find the answer on your first try, or your second try, or your third try. If you're doing something and it's not working, don't be afraid to admit that you were wrong and try something else. Keep an eye out for unconventional partners. Hardcore vegan soup kitchen running Jesus lookalike me would probably not have guessed that 2018 me would be collaborating and working closely with executives from Tyson Foods and Cargill. New coalitions might just be the answer to age-old problems. And then finally, look for win-win. If you can figure out a solution to a problem that doesn't require a radical change in how people tend to see the world, that's going to help. To wit, I thought my goal was to convince everybody to see the world the way that I did, but what I think is actually true is I need to change the world so that it will adapt to the way that people see it. So, in closing, I want to flash back to 1898, so 120 years. The year is 1898. Is everybody with me? Are you in 1898 in your brain? Awesome. the streets of Boston and Philadelphia and New York City and Washington, D.C. and back there, that's why I'm doing this. And all of the great cities of the world are filled in horses and horse-drawn carriages. Actually, I have a slide for this. I don't have a slide for this. Okay. That's a pretty slide, though. Are filled with horses and horse-drawn carriages. It's 1898. And the world's first urban planning conference is convened. And the only item on the agenda is what do we do about all of the horse shit? Because in New York City alone, it's 175,000 horses laying down 50,000 tons of horse excrement every single month. So they convene this. They convene the world's first urban planning conference. It's supposed to go for a couple of weeks. They're planning to plot out how they're going to beat back the horse manure. After a couple of days, they just decide there's just nothing we can do. And everybody just goes home, despondent. They call up their families. Giving into the horse shit. 10 years later, in 1908, Henry Ford comes onto the scene with the Model T. And by 1912, there are more cars than horses on the streets of New York City, and very soon, all of the world's big cities. So who here, when you walk out of this conference, a lot of you are just like walking to dorm rooms, but you walk out of this conference, the next time you're traveling, the next time you're going to New York City or San Francisco or Chicago or wherever, who here is going to hop into a horse-drawn carriage in order to make your way home? All right, we got one. We're going to track you. We're going to find out. No, of course not. That would be absurd, right? I'm absolutely convinced that with markets and food technology, growing crops to feed them to animals so that we can eat animals, vastly inefficient and contributes to all kinds of colossal global problems. Absolutely convinced that using markets and food technology, we can make it seem just as absurd that we would grow all of these crops and feed them to animals to eat meat when there are much better ways to do it. Markets and food technology, they're going to save the world. Thank you. We have like 20 minutes?
Yes, we have 20 minutes for questions. Ron and I have some mics here that will bring to you if you have the question. So we get the recording, which this goes up as well. Oh, yeah, you can step up, please. Yeah. Thank you for that great presentation. I have a silly question and a serious question. The silly question is, when possible.
Let the serious question first. No, I'm just trying to knock out the game.
I love Impossible Burgers. I'm normally very big eater, but they said that's like, what is the price going to come down on those?
Yeah, so the question, I guess you can hear the question, when is the price going to come down on these products? And so the infrastructure, the fixed costs of industrial animal agriculture have already been paid, so all we're paying at this point is the marginal costs. And already you can get the Impossible Burger at White Castle for $2. So it's a little bit supply and demand at the moment. There's one factory in Berkeley producing Impossible Burgers, and the demand is astronomical, so they can pretty much charge whatever they want to charge. And I think they picked something that they think people will pay without, coming to Berkeley and, with pitchforks or whatever. They could charge a lot. They could charge less now. But they don't have to. As they create more factories and as the fixed costs begin to be factored into the marginal costs, the price is going to come down and down and down. And in a not too distant future, the plant-based products will be less expensive than the animal-based products.
The serious question is, this is a Altruism conference. You've done a great job presenting this at a very good cause, but we have to sort of say it's one of the best causes. And so when I compare this to things like, solving poverty and more directly or, preventing malaria, I go through your arguments about the environmental things and reducing animal suffering, and some of those are easy to translate into, I look at carbon costs for the environmental pollution, things like that. But the animal suffering things, I really go back and forth on how to weight, like a quality adjusted life here for humans versus that of chicken. I know you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the Open Philanthropy Project has done some interesting writing on that precise question. And at one end, you've got Peter Singer. And Peter Singer, who was the inspiration for EA, as I'm sure everybody here knows, and in Animal Liberation, he posits that if what you're discussing is a being's right to be free from pain and suffering, the only morally relevant variable is that being's capacity to feel pain and to suffer. And then there are going to be some ancillary costs that he has explored, since then. So if your pain and suffering cause other people to feel pain and suffer, that needs to be factored in as well. But what we know to be true is chickens and finfish and pigs and cows, biologically and physiologically, they feel pain in the same way, and they feel pain to the same degree that human beings do. So it's a bit of a sort of, it's not precise, but it's fairly reasonable from Singer's perspective, and I agree with it, that we would say that a chicken's suffering is not morally different or morally less worthy than my suffering, with some caveats. And even once you factor in the caveats, if you think about more than 8 billion chickens, more than 100 billion pigs, more than 40 million cows, more than 300 million turkeys, and all of them, for their entire lives, are experiencing physiological pain, probably worse than what most of us will experience ever. Like their entire lives are categorized by misery. So you've got the chickens who are growing, essentially the poultry ethologist from the University of Arkansas saying that a chicken grows so quickly that if it were a human baby, she'd weigh 650 pounds at 2 months old. Like their entire lives are misery. So you've got maybe they're equal, but even if they're not equal, you've got 9 billion chickens living just unimaginable suffering and dying horrible deaths against the global human population is what, like 7.4 billion maybe now? Is that about right? Just in the United States, 9 billion farm animals against 7.4 billion human beings. So that's sort of on the animal front. But for me, I adopted a vegan diet and have been vegan for 6 years without even thinking about the animal suffering side of the equation. If you think about things like keeping antibiotics working and the impact of an end to working antibiotics, I don't know how many people here have dived into this, but if you want a sort of terrifying way to spend a couple of hours, go Google the end of working antibiotics. And the effect on human beings is, as I mentioned, according to the UK government, the adverse impact is even greater than the adverse impact of climate change. And you want to spend your next couple of hours to read about the impact of climate change, especially on the global poor. So these are all things that if we can create a societal shift away from industrial animal agriculture and toward products that don't require antibiotics and that have a significantly less adverse impact on climate change, and those are just two of the issues. We can look at species loss and desertification and food security and food safety and kind of a whole range of issues. So it seems to me that it's a critically important issue weighted against any other issue. It's, I think, at least as important, or I could do with something else. Neglected, I hope I made the case that it's hugely neglected. GFI is the only organization in the United States doing just about everything that we're doing. I would love to see an awful lot more in the United States and an awful lot more internationally. Plant-based meat research is particularly, I think, neglected as I attempted to lay out. And then is it tractable? Remains to be seen. Like that was the 3 points that I made were really focused on proving why I am optimistic about tractability. And I am incredibly optimistic about tractability, and so far it's going extraordinarily well. But we are pretty early in the experiment. Lots of reasons I think to be optimistic though.
Hi Bruce, thank you for your presentation. My question is, so I'm a vegetarian, and it sounds, so I very much hear all of these arguments, but my question is, it sounds like a lot of these arguments are against factory farming, and then big climate antibiotic, like all of those impacts are sort of factory farming specific. And I was wondering if GFI's stance was against eating meat on principle, or just like factory farming in general, and if we vastly reduced industrial farming, and for example, either people only ate like very occasionally like clean organic meat, or they just ate vegetables for what they were instead of eating like highly processed clean alternatives. You know, what is the stance on that? Because I feel like from health and environmental perspective, as well as the effort and money going to R&D for like meat alternatives, is it better to eat like a very highly processed vegan burger or like deli slice or cheese alternative, or to just like on the like one time every 2 months when you really want a burger, like eat that like grass-fed burger, you know? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, and I think that that's a fantastic question, and it accentuates a point that I think I probably glossed over, which that GFI is not consumer-facing almost at all. Like our goal is not to be consumer-facing. A lot of what we do ends up being consumer-facing, and our goal is not to convince anybody to go vegan. Our goal is not even really to convince people to eat less meat. Our goal is to create products that people want to buy on the basis of the factors that they already use when they're deciding what they're going to eat. So people want to eat meat, they want to eat whatever meat is going to be cheapest, and they want to eat something that tastes good and is convenient. Our goal is to support an industry that makes those choices be plant-based meat and clean meat. So for people who are willing to pay more anybody here who goes to Whole Foods or kind of anywhere where they have the high welfare, regeneratively farmed animal meat, which is less than 1/5 of 1% of the meat market. This is sort of an interesting case study, and people say that they want one thing, and then what do they actually buy? So more than a third of people say that they want organic meat. Organic meat is 1/5 of 1% of meat sales, so it's literally 120th the size of what it would be if people were, I don't think they're being dishonest when they say they want that, but what they really are buying when they go to the grocery store is whatever is appealing on the basis of taste, price, and convenience. So people have for decades been fighting against factory farming. The environmental groups, the global hunger groups, the health groups, the animal groups have been saying for decades, if you're going to eat meat, eat high welfare meat. They haven't been using the phrase regeneratively farmed, but the idea is meat that is not so bad for the environment, etc. If people did that, that would absolutely be a solution, but it requires that people, when they choose what to eat, that they're willing to pay more, that they're willing to seek out these products, that they're willing to eat significantly less meat. If GFI is unsuccessful because that takes over, I will say, I won't say I was successful, but I'll be thrilled. Just as thrilled as if we're successful. If we're successful and people are eating almost no meat because we're successful, I'm thrilled. If everybody does what you're suggesting, and that's why we're successful, also thrilled. But I do feel like the tractability issue is where that falls down. More factory farmed meat was eaten in 2017 than ever in US history, per capita. Per capita meat consumption in the United States, factory farmed meat consumption was the highest it's ever been in 2017, and it's going to be higher in 2018. Trying to convince people to eat on the basis of the environment or animal protection isn't working. So that's why I'm not working. And then in terms of neglecting this, lots and lots and lots of people are trying to convince the world that they should eat less factory farmed meat. And A, it's not working, and B, lots of people are doing it. Yeah.
Do I misunderstand that interaction? Sorry, thanks very much. I think in large part because of what you have built, to me it seems like there's this unstoppable momentum behind plant-based meat. And just to take a step back from that, I wonder if you imagine a world 50 years from now where for some reason there still is an animal meat industry. What has gone wrong?
Yeah, I like that you think. Thank you. Unstoppable momentum. I hope that's true. as I think, there's sort of the how optimistic, how you want to be, et cetera. I mean, the reality is that the sum total of plant-based meat research really focused on optimizing for competitive plant-based meat that exists sort of in the public domain, stuff that's been done at universities, I think might still be zero. I guess University of Missouri, they've done some. It's really shockingly close to zero. Clean meat research is a lot further along, mostly because everything that everybody's doing in tissue engineering, not everything, most of the stuff that people are doing in tissue engineering applies, but it is still extraordinarily nascent. And governments have put, I think Modern Meadow got like maybe $250,000 from USDA very early when they were still doing clean meat. Now they're doing leather. I think there are a lot of ways that things can go wrong. It's a really big question. I mean, we basically need to create the base of plant-based meat science. We need to create the base of clean meat science. I guess I'm optimistic that even if it all remains in the private sector, and even if it's just Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat and Alpha Foods and these companies and Memphis Meats, there are now 15 clean meat companies. Even if it stays in the private sector, I think we probably are still likely to disrupt industrial animal agriculture because these processes are just so much more efficient. But I could see government stepping into the way. I could see both of these fields simply fizzling. And there are a lot of ways that I think it could not happen. I also think the opportunity cost of it not happening as quickly as absolutely possible is also just absolutely huge. Cameron Meyer-Short, who's on a panel later in the day, did some sort of number crunching about how much less of all these harms happens on the basis of how much more quickly we can make this transition happen, which I think that alone is extraordinarily encouraging in terms of the marginal value of any or everyone in this room deciding that this is your cause area and this is your path, and sort of diving in and figuring out a way that you could do something that wouldn't happen without you.
Hi, Bruce. Thanks for a great talk. I want to be quick because I know we're getting low on time. For various reasons, I'm worried about trends in meat consumption in other countries outside of the U.S. I'm also a little worried that there are barriers for sort of moving progress in the U.S. to other parts of the world, because partially there are traditional barriers to exporting meat to other parts of the world. So probably some of those still apply to.
This is another way that this all called the wrong.
Well, yeah. So my question is, you mentioned working with other countries to encourage them to spend some of their funds on R&D for clean meat. What other steps is GFI taking to promote like clean meat, plant-based meat in other countries? And have you folks considered working with companies that you support in the U.S. on programs to share research and technology with other companies that may be starting up in countries like China, India, where meat consumption is on the rise, that might have the industrial structure to support that kind of company?
Yeah, thank you. One sort of step back on the meat consumption on the rise in China. So Chatham House released a report, Chatham Hoyle Institute of International Affairs in the UK, it's the foremost think tank in Europe. They released a report and it said the governments of the world will find it impossible to meet their Paris climate change agreements unless meat consumption goes down. And their prescription was educate people about the environmental impact of meat, and people will eat less meat. So China said by 2030 we're going to have our per capita meat consumption in response to this Chatham House report. And as you know, meat consumption in China is going like this in response to the Chinese government's commitment to educate their population about this issue. I think it's a critically important issue. So GFI, I mean, on the one hand, we're growing fairly quickly. On the other hand, we have just like an overwhelming amount more to do. So in the US, we're 5% of the global population, so 95% of the human race doesn't live here. And GFI, because we're in the US, we mostly focus on the US. We do have a representative in Israel, in India, and Brazil. We're pretty close, I think, to having somebody in the EU, and we're trying to hire somebody in China. But our efforts in those countries are just barely getting off the ground. We are not doing internationally everything we're doing in the US. Our focus is going to be educating governments with the twin goals of ensuring that clean meat has a regulatory red carpet rolled out for it, and getting money and resources put into plant-based meat and clean meat. And then the sort of complementary other half of that is making sure if they want to fund it, that there are scientists who understand what it is and want to do it. We have not yet gotten around. We just have not yet had sort of the bandwidth. Although I think it does make a tremendous amount of sense to work. I mean, Tyson is working with Beyond Meat to expand internationally, and some of the VCs are working with Impossible to expand internationally. So they are expanding internationally, but I think you're absolutely right that right now what's happening internationally is vastly under-resourced, and hopefully we will be addressing that more and more.
We have time for one more question. I see 2 people have been standing for a little while.
She's been sitting for a little while raising her hand.
Oh, okay. Well, then you have it. All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, guys. So I had a question about coalition building. And in particular, I was wondering how to deal with issues where there are people who appear to be natural allies, but sort of as these products move forward, there turn out to be tensions. We saw things like that with GMOs coming out, where environmentalists seem to be really natural allies with products or crops that require less or fewer inputs, and there turned out to be huge resistance. And I was wondering what strategies there are for dealing with that kind of before the conflicts arise. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's a little late for before the conflicts arise to some degree, unfortunately. But I think,
As they arise.
I think mitigation strategies, as well as much as possible getting out in front of this for people who haven't taken a negative and I think wrong position yet. And that's a part of what our policy department is doing. So we have a lobbyist who's focused on coalition building, and we have an environmental health scientist who's focused on laying out the argument for why these technologies should make organizations that tend to be wary of technology supportive of these technologies. And we have found ourselves, not just in coordination, cooperation, alliance with some of the really big food companies who are surprisingly our allies. But so far, like Michael Pollan, I don't know how many people know Michael Pollan, but he's just sort of synonymous with slow food, high welfare, etc. He has said nothing but positive things about both plant-based meat and clean meat as things that will help with issues that he is concerned about and the reasons to eat slow food. He sees slow food as a complement to plant-based meat and clean meat, but he's supportive of plant-based meat and clean meat, which I see is very encouraging. The Environmental Working Group is very supportive. There's a new book out about GMOs that says plant-based meat and clean meat because the number one place that GMOs are used is in feed crops. So massive amounts of feed crops taken out of production, ergo massive amounts of GMOs taken out of production on the basis of these technologies. But reaching out to the people who might have sort of an anti-tech and consequently anti-these tech philosophy is something that we're sort of beginning to do, but we want to marshal the arguments so we go into it with the strongest possible actual analysis. And this is another example where the life cycle analysis of these, we can stand up and say, meat bad, but we also need the clean meat, plant-based meat good response in a fairly well thought out and scientific way, which is something that our environmental health scientist is doing. All right, I'm around all day, so anybody who didn't have a question or just wants one-on-one time, I'm here and delighted to chat with all of you. Thank you so much for being here.